Yeah, hello and welcome to the show, Henry Marsh of Sailor. Thank you very much for taking some time to talk to me about 50 years of Sailor, which is a great thing to celebrate, of course, but maybe celebrate, whatever.
Absolute pleasure, Katrin, as always. And of course, you shared a lot of that with us, haven't you? So you're the best one to ask the questions or to talk about it with.
Yeah, I thought we should try and do something for the website and for my radio show, which I inherited from my late big brother, because, I mean, we did so many things with Sailor, for Sailor, and had so much fun because of you guys. I thought I should be doing something for the anniversary, really.
You absolutely did, and you know, God bless Carsten. I mean, the two of you. I don't know how effective it was, but it was very effective in terms of keeping us alive in the public's eye, especially in Germany. But as you know, a lot of people in Europe, and we'll never know quite how much that did, because we just always felt very welcome every time you came over, and you and Carsten worked so hard on all that.
Yeah, always a pleasure. I was saying to the other guys, it's really amazing to look back at it all and remember all the good times we had thanks to all of you guys, the original lineup as well as the later ones with Ollie and Tom and Pete and everybody, and also all the fantastic friends we've made through Sailor. I'm still in touch with people like Crystal and Michaela and Heiner and a lot of other fans for like almost 30 years now. So this is kind of amazing.
How lovely to hear that, because I think all bands have that, actually. I don't want to say it's just Sailor, but because Sailor was I have to say now, such an unusual sounding band.
Yeah.
People who remember A Glass of Champagne and Girls, 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 we know those as hit singles, and then later on we have the later Sailor. But that they definitely bought the records and they love them. But people that knew Sailor as a band, like from the very first album, it was such an unusual, strange little world that George really created and that we all contributed to, that I always feel that Sailor fans who really knew all the music, they certainly sort of had a completely different collective behavior together. I think it was something a bit special. So it's lovely to hear that you've made a sort of almost a little personal club out of it, of friends. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's one of the greatest things, isn't it? I think about entertainment, about music, is that actually it can gather people together who didn't actually play the music, but who listened to it.
Yeah. I mean, at the time it was fun to be at the shows and to have all these adventures, but just now looking back at it all, I can really, really appreciate it. And it makes it even more special to have all these wonderful memories thanks to you guys. It's
Well,
really great.
I have to thank you in a way. I've got the trouble with, you can see me probably, but other people are there seeing. But behind me, I've got not anymore. I've got rid of them all. But I mean, the amount of music that I've done over the years when I haven't been in Sailor, and so much of it was ended up on CDs and DVDs that just are historical. And I don't mean professional ones. I mean ones just for me to remember what I've done. But
Yeah.
I've got a whole cupboard full of DVDs of yours to do with all the concert that you attended and filmed of Sailor, and it's like the largest separate collection of DVDs, which shows not only how many you attended, but how many of them were filmed. I'm amazed you can still use your hands, because all the time you were there with camera.
Yeah, I mean, Carsten did most of the filming in those days.
Yes,
Which
that's right,
was
of course, because you were always on screen, weren't you, waving at the air, waving at Carsten. Brilliant.
which is great, yeah. Especially because we captured a couple of really great 90s shows from the original lineup, which is fantastic. Carsten filmed this on his gigantic old Sony camera, which felt like holding a bunch of bricks, but it was fantastic, still good quality. And I'm glad we got those moments with you, the four of you, and the black Nickelodeon and everything. That was really special.
Yes, that's right. Of course, we, just as it was really happening for us in 1976 or 77, whenever it was. You'll tell me. When did we do the Sailor Special in Germany? What year was that?
That was on TV in 76 at some point. I mean, you had quite a lot of success before with Trouble and with Champagne and Girls, of course, but
Yes.
the TV special is what
Yes, but
made it all.
We didn't come to Germany until you saw us. We didn't come to Germany to perform until you saw us. So if we hadn't reformed, we would never have done. We did European tours, and I kind of blame more management for that rather than us not sticking together. I think that Steve O'Rourke, who managed us, he was so determined to throw us out to America, which is what he obviously did with Pink Floyd. And as we were kind of, a hit band at that point, he assumed that would work for us. And anybody that's read these stories, it wasn't an enjoyable experience for us. But the worst thing about it was that we didn't carry on attending to our homeland, and our homeland was Europe. It wasn't UK. Yeah. The homeland was very much Europe because of I think the music, first of all, Holland seemed to respond. Germany should have enjoyed us back in the early in the mid 70s. We should have done a really good tour of Germany. So it was wonderful to come back as the original lineup. And I think we met you at the very first one we did we?
Yeah, I mean, you did a couple of playback TV gigs like Bad Segeberg and Berlin and stuff like that. But I think our first concert in Dortmund, where you actually got us backstage and made sure we got to meet you all, that's pretty much one of your very first comeback live shows in Dortmund in '93.
Bad Segeberg was more like a TV mime, really. So yeah, and generally could see. But yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, so much to talk about, and now I can't think of anything to say. Yeah, I think you did a couple of shows actually in Germany in the 70s, but maybe only one or two, because I got photos from one of them, from Ursula, in case you remember her. She used to come with her little daughter Stephanie to the shows, and she's got a couple of photos from, I think, a concert in 76 or 77. But you didn't do many shows. If
maybe I'm not recalling because we didn't have enough. I remember doing Sweden and doing enough gigs to feel that we'd done a tour of Sweden, and I remember a tour of Denmark. I don't remember Germany being included, so there may have been just one or two gigs, but I associate Germany as the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to the other guys a lot about how everybody first met, and Phil and George talked a lot about Kajanus Pickett, of course, and then Grant talked about the early days. So how did you become a part of Sailor in the first place?
I think that's the best question, isn't it, really? Because that's when all four of us have told that one, then you've got a complete picture, absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, it's very straightforward, really, and I've actually got a photograph somewhere. Have you got the photograph of Phil and I throwing snowballs at a camera up in Megève?
No, I don't have that.
Catherine, I find that impossible to believe. When
I remember you talked to me about that, but I think I haven't seen it.
Well, I might send it to you anyway. But here's a picture. When I was 21, when my cousin was 21 and I was 16, I played her 21st birthday party with my school band in about 1964 with Jeremy Irons, the actor, was the drummer of the band, right? And then recently I did her 80th birthday party with Ollie, and I played bass and Ollie sang various songs, including the two Sailor songs. And here I am with my grandson Magnus.
Ah.
And he's such a lovely little fella.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of photos from Ollie, but he's so cute.
There I am by the seaside. But I shall definitely send you the one because it's quite relevant. I met Phil to talk to when I was in Gringo, and we were playing in a ski resort in France. And we were playing in this ski resort because one of the waiters in Saint-Tropez in the south of France when Gringo played down there, thought we were so wonderful. We were sort of, you know, it's sort of Beatles and sort of rock.
Yeah.
And he got us to play in this club, and it was manager didn't like us, and we got kicked out of the club. So suddenly there we were, and we had no gig. But our manager, Tony Cox, had brought some cronies down, some friends down with him to have a good time. I used to hate that, actually. People would turn up to hang around the band. You know, we got the job, but somehow these hangers-on came to have a free, presumably skiing holiday on us. But
Yeah.
they turned up, they turned up to find 4 other pissed off people with no club to play in. And so we went to the mayor of Megève, which is a ski town, and said, "No, we are an English band, you know, rock and roll. We'll play in for free. We'll do a free open air concert for you." And so that is what we did. And you know, they even erected a stage for us, and all these other holiday makers, some of their skis over their shoulders, came around the corner. And one of the people there was Phil Pickett. And Phil was a friend of Tony's, and he'd come down, and we really got on well. We really bonded. He was obviously very keen musician, but he was more involved. I think he was working in a publisher's office then, but he was certainly very into writing. I only found out about his friend George through we had a roadie called Phil Benton. In fact, there's a lovely photograph of us playing in the town square of Megève, and we don't have a control room, so we got our transit van, our Ford van. The slide door is open. There's this guy with a beard and moustache mixing our sound, and that's Phil Benton. And Phil had always told me about Phil, his friend, they all came from the same kind of school, I think, almost in Birmingham. They were a very, very close-knit group of people, and he told me about this chap Phil. And Phil and I remember we just got on very, very well. And I have a photograph of us on top of a mountain with this photographer that the manager had brought Phil, a photographer, and other people, just various people to come along and imbibe in some of the local hallucinogens, probably. No, actually, no, drink. Let's keep it a family show. And we yeah, we got on incredibly well, and it was very sweet. And then when I got back home, we were playing the Revolution, and Phil turned up with his new girlfriend, who was called Anne, and it became his wife, and he was very nice. So then Susan and I, absolutely, we were, let's get this right, yeah, we'd been living in a rented place, and we had we didn't really know what to do. We haven't got very much money, and Gringo was about to split up, actually. And Phil said, "Well, I've got this house in Putney, and you know, I'm renting out rooms, but they're very big rooms, are like bedsits." Susan and I lived above Phil, and he was like our landlord. So he would pay us we would pay our rent to him. And the interesting thing was, I'd heard this album, Kyanus Pickett, and I hadn't met George, but I remember one day I was looking out of the window. I used to go downstairs to see Phil. He'd be playing the piano and we'd chat. And he's a bit of a Gringo fan. He said he was. He may not think so now, but he said he was at the time. And I remember, you know, we never really talked about being in a band together, because at that point I was still in Gringo. But Gringo folded, and I was probably miserable living upstairs. And I just remember one specific thing. I remember the front door bell ringing. You could always hear it. And it meant that usually somebody who lived downstairs would go to the front door. And in this case, obviously, Phil lived in the basement, so he'd come up at the front door. I looked out of the window, and there were 2 people waiting to go in. And one was a guy called Mo Foster, who was a bass player. And the other guy was a bloke called Grant Serple. And they were going, presumably, to meet Phil and George with a view to possibly playing in Kyanus Pickett or something like that. Because then later on, Phil said, "George and I are thinking of you know, forming a band. Would you want to have a go?" And I remember turning up and meeting this guy with this extraordinary Salvador Dali moustache and a lot of hair and a ponytail. Very, very shy. That was George. And obviously the songs that I thought, they had a real natural they were songwriters, whereas I was in a band that wrote songs. It was very different. But anybody that's any I say German viewers or listeners especially, because there's so many great German bands, you know what it's like when you're in a band and you all stand together and you all write a song together as you're plugged in. And sometimes you can write a hit record, but invariably you get some energy going and you've got great numbers to play live. Gringo did that quite a lot, although Simon and I and Gringo wrote a lot of songs, and I'm very, very pleased with them. But we were more band players that wrote songs. Phil and George, even though George was in a collection, I considered them to be writers of songs. They sat down and they crafted songwriting, and the Candace Pickett album, I could hear this, especially Changes, this the first song on that. I thought, wow, what's that? And everybody was desperately trying to make demos then. So that's how I first saw them. That's how I first met them. And then we eventually we had a little get together, and Paul Warren was playing the drums, a lovely friend of Phil's and a good friend of mine who lived in the same building. And we went, and it didn't really happen. And I think George, it may have been that George wasn't that keen then, as keen as Phil. I don't know. George had obviously been in a collection. He'd been in a band. Phil had a band in Birmingham, but he really wanted to get something happening. And in Phil's energy has been a major key in anything happening. That's always important to remember, because we will all flatter each other. As I said, to me, George is one of the few real geniuses I've worked with. They can have to talk about me and say how wonderful I am, because I'm not going to do that. But in the case of Grant is quite the most musical drummer I've ever worked with. And I think a band is defined by the sound of its drummer, not by the sound of its singer or the sound of its musicianship. It's usually, if the drummer has a personality, it stands out. And you can tell for the bands that don't have a noticeable drummer, they're not forgettable, but you can't define them that well. So Grant, without doubt, and also Grant's the reason we did the Sailor music, because he was the one that heard it and liked it. I may have liked it, or I may now be lying and say I liked it, but probably Grant was the one that really liked it, and I didn't have any axe to grind.
The famous Sailor's Night on a Town moment, yeah.
Sailor's Night on a Town moment, precisely. And Phil is the guy who absolutely has all the energy and creative power to make things happen. And he's done it on a number of occasions. Phil is the reason I think we had a Sailor reunion. That is just the fact that I would say that the reason we had hit records is because George wrote 2 songs, but the actual existence of Sailor on the road is Phil's energy and enthusiasm with people in the music business to make us re-emerge. So yeah, that was how I met them.
Fantastic. I knew the very shortened version of this, but I never heard it in this much detail. So thanks a lot for sharing that with all of us. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and thank you for testing to see if I'm so old I can't remember anything at all, because I find myself remembering things, and it's actually very good for me. So yes, try me on something else now. See what happens.
Yes, see, I mean, it's fantastic what you just said about Grant, because he's always claiming, oh, I'm just a drummer, nobody cares for the drummer, and I'm always in the background, I don't matter. Actually, those were his first words to Carsten and me when we met. Well, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I've been telling him for 30 years how much he matters and how much he means.
Yes,
but yeah, it's important to stress that, I think, really.
Well, Ollie was playing, because he comes to Germany and you always make him welcome when he comes out, but he does these amazing solo gigs in a bit like Pete, and he was playing a pub in Maidenhead, and this was 2 Saturdays ago, and Grant and Mitch and Edmund and Charlotte and their wives and husbands all came down.
Fantastic.
And Dee Dee came with me, because she never usually wants to go out to the pubs, but she came and she started dancing with Charlotte's husband, and Ollie was on great form. And Grant Grant was feeling very sensitive, and he said to me, he said, "Do you know, I arrived and I had a flat tire. My bloody car had a tire flat, and I thought, well, before he performs, I'm going to see if it's a flat tire or whether." But I was pumping it up, and Grant came out to help me. I think he just wanted to get away from everybody in the pub and have a chat. He said, "You know, one of the greatest things in my life," he said, "I'm so grateful to have been with three such amazingly talented people. I feel so grateful." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Why do you always say," and I got quite angry with him. I said, "Why do you always say this?" And I give him an example, but he's so modest, he can't take compliments. So I'll give you an example, because I said to him, "Do you remember the Sailor reviews we used to get that weren't just pop type reviews? You know, the musical reviews from the cynical journalists. They said, yeah. Sailor, great harmonies, good songs, with an amazing drummer."
Yes.
That's what the review said. It didn't say, "What a keyboard player," you know, or, you know, the 12-string style of George Kaianis is second to none. You know, we all could play, and the individual parts we played were not easy. So basically, the end result is the sound called the Sailor sound. And we all know about the unique differences. And Phil can talk about being forced to play bass, which became his left hand rather than a bass guitar. And, you know, how I was playing, rather than another guitar, I was playing a keyboard. And that George is obviously, the whole thing was central to a 12-string sound. And I think that's why the best George songs were all based on 12-string. And we work around them. There's no doubt that if there hadn't been a technological advancement and George only had a 12-string, there'd probably be about 3 more albums worth of hits. But I think George just took one look at electronic stuff and went, yes. And so I do the same thing. You know, we'd all do it. So drum sounds can be created on their own, electric, this. But in the case of Grant, yes, a good band with an excellent drummer. And he was, and still is. I don't know, Tom, my son's done very well, and he's a very powerful drummer. And when he joined us, he was, you know, everything was exciting and fiery, and Ollie's got an enormous voice. Oh, but yes. The Sailor sound was defined by what I would call Grant's top kit, in that all the melodic part, if you listen to all the Latin American stuff, and you also listen to the sparing nature of it, I would liken him very much to why Charlie Watts was so popular in the Rolling Stones. When you think of bands like Metallica, where Lars Ulrich's all over the kit all the time, you've got really big rock bands doing stuff. Why is it the Stones sound so kind of sexy still? It's because Charlie just had a very, very right and sensible and economic way of drumming. So yes, Grant should be ashamed of himself for thinking that he isn't brilliant.
Indeed, perfectly said. You know, when I talked to him a couple of weeks ago, he just kept saying over and over again how glad he is to have had this wonderful life, and all thanks to the three of you, just as you said now. So
yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, I have very, very fond memories of our big adventure. You know, absolutely. Yeah.
Now if you're looking for a lady to snuggle up in your bed, you better think about movies or pictures instead, for you don't make love in Panama until you've bought a camera. Standing up and down the sidewalks with uniforms in their hands, showing up with the price tag to make you understand that you don't make love in Panama until you've bought a camera. Any kind of little something that you want to try, all depends on what you buy. Or if you buy a watch, that will only keep her
Yeah, and I mean the whole Sailor sound is, as you just said, defined by the drums as well as that famous Nickelodeon sound, by the style of your playing, by Phil's playing, by George's fantastic songwriting and work on the 12th string, but also by all of your great harmonies, which is what makes many of the songs so special. They stand out a lot, like Blue Desert and many, many more. It's just amazing how you made that sound, not only on the records, but also at the couple of live recordings I have from the 70s, like this 76 South End video, which is just amazing. And yeah, I love it.
No, you're sweet. The thing is,
That's why people still remember you, because it stood out so much, you know.
well, the songs, you know, I'm sure a lot of people do it, or I don't know what bands are like now. But the thing is, if you're working on a song and you've got all these instruments to play, the bands that actually go, okay, the song was written on one instrument by a bloke sitting at home. Let's assume in the case of most of the Sailor stuff and the other thing, that's what it was. George had lots of ideas, and a lot of the parts I played, he would sing to me, or he want me to play, because he made demos which would define that. But generally speaking, we would sit round the guitar once we knew how we thought it would go, and we worked on vocal harmonies. And the vocal harmonies, Grant hated singing, he didn't want to sing, but George, to his credit, said to Grant, we're going to find those low notes for you. And it worked, and we recorded him as well. He didn't, he wasn't allowed to get away with it. So, so we were four people singing, but yeah, Grant's right. Basically, it was the three. When I went to Colorado with Phil, and we worked with Ginny Gercio, who was responsible for Blood, Sweat and Tears and Chicago. When I sang, I always remember Jimmy Gercio going, Jesus Christ, you could cut down trees with that voice. I have not the most pretty sounding voice, you know. I mean, especially with Ollie, who's trained, you start from the stomach and you sing up. I do sound a bit like a sort of Black and Decker saw. I'm like, ah, and you know, and funnily enough, because I loved the Beatles, I didn't have to think about it. And I remember I was always like, ah, and Simon Burning-Gringa had this beautiful tenor voice that sang all the McCartney stuff. But I had a very, very loud, mid-rangey voice. If you don't push it too high or too low, I'm probably the loudest thing in the room. But it's no vibrato, and it's not sounding particularly good. However, with Phil having this big voice as well, but a lower frequency, you could both do very high falsettos and things. And with the powerful and defined, warm, sort of velvety sound of George's voice, it just happened when we did the very first song, Brag, 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 which is when we realized we were actually going to form a band. I turn up, and this time, George and Phil were both going, we're going to have a go. So I had my Les Paul guitar, and I went blunk, blunk, blunk all the way. You can hardly hear it, but it's in there. And as soon as we did that, brag, brag, and brag, which is, if you hear anybody, any archivist wants to listen to it, you can find it on these albums. You'll hear basically a standard Beatle-y type of, you know, Midwest rock harmony, but you can hear actually the three of our voices. You can hear Phil's tone of voice, you can hear my tone of voice, and George's. And the great thing about our singing together is that if you double track my voice, immediately that terrifying rasp goes away. And American producers, you know, as Bruce Johnson was the same with the Beach Boys when he produced us. I mean, he thought I had the worst voice he'd ever heard in his life. So the thing is, you know, I never worried. I love singing harmonies, always have done. And so Phil and I also loved it because we love the Beatles. So your interesting point is that yes, the Nickelodeon sounded big, and everything else sounded powerful song-wise. But when you've got good vocal harmonies in songs, it makes a hell of a lot of difference. And we really loved doing the vocal arrangements. Funnily enough, the third step, which didn't do as well as Trouble, and I consider Trouble to be the album if somebody wanted to do next year. To me, I said, it's the 50th anniversary of the Trouble album, within which the song Sailor, the song A Glass of Champagne, was born. Because the story to me would be the story of this extraordinary sound that got developed that defied all other bands that were happening. And eventually the record company was relieved to see that we'd made an album. We used American producers, but it had a hit song on it. Because as much as we liked Traffic Jam, the international market didn't see a hit song until they heard A Glass of Champagne.
I got the money, I got the place. You got the figure, you got the face. Let's get together, the two of us, over a glass of champagne. I got the music, I got the light. You got the figure, full of the light. Let's get together, the two of us, over a glass of champagne. I've been waiting much too long for this moment to come along. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh
So in a way, it was that to me, it's the 50th anniversary of that album, which is like a great achievement. However, it's fair to say it is champagne. But on the third step, Gimme La Samba, it gives an example of how ridiculous and silly our vocals could become. And we used to do it live. We did it, before we split up, we did that live on stage. And you've got some of those early recordings from the 70s, and we're actually kind of nearly nailing it, because there was quite a lot of overdubbing on that. But yeah, we love singing. Enough of that.
Fantastic. Yeah, also things like Let's Go to Town, as I said, on this South End live concert from '76 and stuff like that. It sounds so amazing and almost just like the record. And Grant said to me he saw a couple of bits on YouTube recently and thought it was actually playback because it sounded so good. And then at some point he realized, because George changed the lyric somewhere, that it was actually live, and he was so proud of it, he said.
Absolutely. Well, the thing was, the first album, we could replicate note for note what we played in the studio, because they were usually a backing track of keyboards. And then when the Nickelodeon solo came in, they were overdubbed 3 different sounds to make it sound like a street organ. But then by the time we went out on the road, George had designed the Nickelodeon, and we'd had this keyboard thing that we had these different mechanisms to make different sounds, because there was no it wasn't MIDI electronic keyboards that could give you lots of sounds. You either had a piano, an organ, and that was it. You know, it's a Hammond organ, a piano, or various sorts of electric piano. Then the synthesizer first came out. They were single note jobs, which is the bass is a single note synth, and the sound underneath Sailor was the single note synth. So up to that point, that was all we had. So those early concerts, we're nailing it, actually. Yeah, at first, you know, and then later on it gets more difficult.
Yeah. George talked a lot about how it made him nervous that the Nickelodeon might break down at any second during shows, and then sometimes it did, and he had to fix something real quick, and you had to improvise while he was backstage welding something together, kind of. That must have been fun.
Okay, Freies in Aylesbury. We hadn't got a lot of. We had 1 or 2 English venues that were beginning to the audiences were beginning to behave differently to anything any of us had experienced. Grant had been an affinity, and audience would nod their head off for a song, usually a bit stoned because it was jazz. Gringo, everybody was completely out of their trees, you know, especially if you were playing in Holland. So you didn't get applause, you didn't get clapped, you just got the song, and you know, that was it. When a collection had a respectful following, but when we played Pentameter in Scarborough, we only had album 1, and we ran out of songs, and we just started again, and the whole crowd went mad. whereas we were dressed as sailors and making this sound that didn't have any lead guitars in it. And I didn't know if we were just going to be one of those novelty things that some people would like. And Arthur Sheriff, who'd come from CBS to look after, he ended up working for Elton John later on, but he was a part of CBS Records. He came with us because we were like the new signing. And he saw everybody just going absolutely mad at the end of the song, end of the thing, and we came off stage all looking at each other like in disbelief, complete disbelief. And presumably that was before we actually had a hit in Holland, but maybe not. And the other venue was Friars in Aylesbury, which is this lovely guy, I think Dave Potts or something, who ran it. Dave Stops. And same sort of reaction, and it was always an electronic connection in the synthesizer that operated Phil's bass. So that would have been a reason we'd have to stop playing. If it had been my side of it, the bassist to my sound was a piano. So if some of the sounds in there had gone, well, you just turn the piano up and I just hit everything harder and the show would have gone on. Without a bass, you've had it. So I can remember, yes, George with a soldering iron and soldering wire. And I remember what George said. He said, I'm afraid we've got to go now. I leave you in the capable hands of Henry Marsh. As he said.
With the accordion.
He didn't discuss this with me. He just said, I leave you in the capable hands of Henry Marsh. I thought, what are you doing? And so he disappeared. And yes, I think I remember I did this one or two silly songs on the accordion. Then I just said, so I'm really sorry. I said, I'm sure we'll be back soon. And I thought I'd leave the stage and they'd wait. And a little voice at the front, somebody in the audience was like, don't go.
Oh.
And it was so sweet. I thought, you're coming to see a band that isn't playing, and I'm standing here with an accordion, but just me being on the stage and still being a part of the band that they wanted to carry and sing, they wanted, don't go. So I think I remember chatting, and I just sort of chatting with people, saying, so your mum's a nurse, is she? Okay, so where do you live? Do you live around the corner? Is there a good Indian restaurant in Aylesbury? It became like that, and then yes, George had come out, the thing had been repaired, and we'd carry on. Yeah.
So that's your origin of being the entertainer in the sailor shows, as you do in later days.
Not really. I think the origin was, it gave me so much joy, and at the same time, you can only misbehave if somebody else is behaving. If an entire classroom is full of badly behaved students, nobody stands out, right? But if everybody else is as good as gold, the guy at the back behaving badly is the one who's going to pull all the girls, isn't he?
I see.
So, the guy at the back of the classroom, all right, yeah, and everybody else is looking so good. George provided me with that ability, because George couldn't really go out of character. He had to be, a lot of people thought George was a bit like a Valentino character, a bit aloof, and that's what I think was his allure and his attention. But the reality was that he was quite scared, a very shy performer. He wasn't a rock and roller. He was a guy singing his songs and getting into the character of whatever the lyric was. By the way, this is my interpretation of George. He may well put it differently. But obviously, by him doing that, we suddenly find ourselves on stage, not singing rock chick songs about climbing into cars and driving down Route 66. We were singing about a strange world. So therefore, I was sort of self-conscious in that I knew there was no world I could inhabit in the rock and roll world when I was performing this stuff. So somewhere down the line, I started being silly, and then fatally, an audience laughed at something I did. And that was it. Then I was uncontrollable for about 3 more years. So I don't think it was anything to do with breaking down synthesizers.
Yeah.
And of course, bear in mind, Phil is probably the funniest person I know. And invariably, Phil would provide me with, he would say something outrageous, and then I'd use it on stage sort of the next night. I wasn't necessarily an originator of a lot of the humor.
but also on stage, the two of you were always a great duo in everything you did.
Well, that's right. And of course, the music demanded joy. It didn't demand necessarily pathos. I mean, you could say of songs like Blue Desert, songs that reflect, of course. When we used to do Jacaranda live back in the days when George carted that harp around, yeah, you know, there were. I liked the fact that we could go to melancholy moments in the early days. The trouble is, when you first saw us, we came back as a band that was expected to play recognizable songs to people that were pop music fans from the 70s.
For 30 minutes, yes.
Fans. So
yeah.
you were up against Sweet's 10 or 11 hits, the Searchers' 30 hits, the Trogs' 10 hits, and Sailors' 2 hits then, because basically we hadn't done it. Cumbia and Secretary, no, they'd come out, that's why we were there. But it was very difficult for us to adjust, having had an evening with Sailor before, where you had all the different moods and the people were absolutely on top of those songs. The albums were current and were in the charts. And I've always missed that. It's never the actual musicality of the 70s. That's never been anything quite like that. But the joy of doing the night has got to do a lot with the Wagners, and they've got to do a lot with the people that came with the Wagners, because you gave us a bit more of an identity, you know.
Oh.
No, well, you did, because by being there in the audience and singing, you know, everybody knows it. You know, when we did there's various, that Volkswagen gig or whatever it was. What was that one we did with Tom and Ollie, I think? Well, we just like, but
yeah, at the car dealership, at the big one, yeah.
Yeah, well, the main host pointed out the atmosphere of the Sailor Appreciation Society. So that was, you know, that the 90s was given a lot more expression by having people that knew us and liked us and made it a bit more important. Otherwise, we would have been, you know, doing it for people who only remember, people that only know a glass of champagne and girls, girls, girls. I don't consider them to have anything whatsoever to do with being a Sailor fan. They're people who, the song was powerful and attracted a lot of attention for people that would listen to other records. And I'm always dismayed by the fact that you couldn't have had the success we had without Champagne, but the existence of Champagne kissed goodbye to stuff that had been before. I'm just talking historically about the music industry. I'm not really talking about loving to make music, but that's what I saw happen.
Yeah, I mean, over here, Girls, Girls, Girls was even bigger than Champagne. And what Carsten and I experienced at all the Oli nights you did in the 90s was that many people thought you were doing covers when you played Secretary and La Cumbia. They didn't even associate those big comeback hits, which were quite big in Germany in like 91 and on TV a lot in those days with you guys when I got to know you. They didn't actually associate them with being your hits like the old ones. And we experienced that so many times and it made us really mad at.
Okay, but I'm interested when you say that.
Crazy.
Which people though? I mean, the people who, not people that came from, people that were Sailor fans before?
No, just regular audience members all around us at the Oli nights. And we always thought, how can that be? I mean, they were really quite big hits just before you started performing again.
Sailor had a sound. It was an organic sound in the 70s. And there's no doubt that Sailor didn't have a Sailor sound when we reformed. It had George Carney's voice and it had our harmonies. And people that love Sailor would go, absolutely, I love it. But the actual sound of the drums and everything, they're very much, they're not really Grant, they're electronic sounding drums. Grant may be doing things. Everything is it's got a completely different organic structure. So although you would hear enough of Sailor in it to marry it to the music that you remember loving, and there we are doing it. So it's very difficult not to say it's concentrated Sailor. It's got all 4 members on it. It's got George's voice, it's got our harmonies, but somebody new listening to it, it would have more of a contemporary recorded sound to it. So I can imagine somebody going, well, you know, is that really them? I think, yeah, especially if, you know, you don't usually come back 20 years, 15 years later with new songs, do you?
That's true. I mean, that was extraordinary. You were the only of the only bands that came back in the original lineup, plus the only one who had 2 big new hits. And by now, I said this to Phil recently when we talked, by now, as weird as it sounds, from all the only bands Carsten and I have ever seen, you are the only one where all original members are still alive. That's quite extraordinary as well, as weird as this might sound now. But
I'll try and
really lucky. Yeah.
I'm driving to Richmond tomorrow. I'll try and drive carefully to make sure I keep that average up.
Come on.
Well, you know, you'll find this as you get older, but you do. So many people that have been dear friends for me have died, and it's very interesting because it reminds me of because my mother lived with me until she died, and Dee Dee and I cared for her. She died at 103. I remember my mother being 80, and I remember my mother being this old woman in her mid-70s. And now here I am, still mentally about 12, still a kid. But I have this thing against my birth certificate that suggests that I'm not a kid. And I have great difficulty in believing that. And my mother always said to me, I don't feel this age, dear. You know, I don't feel old, you know. And it's a very nice thing to feel, that I am like that. Whether that means I'm going to live for a long time or whether I'm just deluded, I don't know. But I've noticed that I don't seem to dwell on the friends I've lost, even if I've really, you know, and it might sound a bit callous. It might be a deliberate attempt to deny it, I don't know. But when people have died, the shock of it is so awful. And especially if they've died just because they're a little bit older than me and they've had a good life, that's even worse, because you at no point does a person wake up in the morning and think, well, I think I'm old enough to die now. I don't think people think that, obviously, because we're created to wake up and be energized with our day and get on with it. But I don't tend to think about it. And you know, so many people and bands that I've been so fond of, and they've just gone, you know. Most recently, I said to Dee Dee, I know about a year or so ago, so I've got to call up Titch because he's in Salisbury, and I promised we'd go out to a lunch with him and his wife. Yes. I opened the newspaper and he died. Yeah. And then Reg Presley at Troggs I became very close to him for a while. He's gone. But the biggest loss of all was Barry Mason, who I wrote with a lot, who introduced me really to my career in America, writing music for theatre and things, which gave me a whole new way of exploring writing and doing stuff, and proved, you know, to be a very enjoyable time. Barry was responsible, a very generous, kind soul, and he's completely gone. And he and I had a sort of relationship which, when, you know, not the phone not ringing and him not coming at the other, and is pretty grim. And I'm sure, you know, we all feel this. You feel the same thing with Carsten, is that we know that they're with us and we miss them, but sometimes it's too much to entertain the lack of somebody. But I tell you, when you get to 75 and you begin to realize that, you know, that, you know, as many other people who have led a full life and have got to that age, you can't really sort of go, well, I've got 10, 20 years or whatever ahead of me. Having said that, I still look forward to things, and I don't really get emotionally nostalgic about Sailor. I always feel that I see these young people having this extraordinarily enjoyable young experience, and I just hope my children, and I hope, you know, you've already said you've had a great adventure in years. You can taste and picture those decades that you've enjoyed. Yeah, and then we say, I've had a wonderful life. Yes, Grant says he's had a great life. I wanted to carry on having a great life. I don't, you know, don't want to be too reflective, do we?
It's like not stopping.
It's not like
no one's stopping anywhere soon.
I really hope not.
Yeah. I mean, we've also lost a couple of Sailor fans recently. Norbert, the big Sailor record collector, passed away last year, and our dear friend Wilma, and a couple of other really lovely people. And so, yeah, I mean, But I'm just grateful, as you just said, about all these wonderful memories. I mean, so many good moments. We've seen Sailor live. I've seen Sailor live, I think, 118 times, plus the shows that Ollie does these days. And then
I
if
know
you add,
when
if you add Pete Lincoln's solo shows, Pete Lincoln's suite shows, Pete Lincoln's shows with the front man and all of that, I mean, that's like maybe 300 or more. Put that in days that are filled with just pure happiness, just because of these people you met,
that's
and it's
300.
countless.
How many days are there in a year? 365.
Yeah.
So you've probably at least had a year's worth of entertainment without, every day of a
Just
year. You've actually
yeah.
you've been enjoying that. Yes.
Plus things like seeing you guys at other occasions. I mean, Wilma and I flew over to see Casper the Musical when you did that, and
Of course.
Crystal and I flew over to see Rob Orleton's fantastic musical Fast Food, and lots of all these special moments in addition to all of that. It just adds on top.
That's right.
It's
That's
just
fantastic.
great.
Yeah, wonderful.
Even the fact that we're still all in touch. I mean, George left the band when I was 15 years old. There shouldn't be any reason for him to still be in touch, but yet we meet at least once a year somewhere in London and go out and have way too much wine. And he doesn't need to do that, but it's fantastic to be able to call all of your friends and just have you.
And absolutely, and I mean it. You've been so, especially to me, you've been so dear to me. What you've done, and also your love for Sailor is totally innocent. There's a natural, any innocent affection is something that we see it in people we meet. We see it. The reason we love our pets and the reason we love honest, straightforward people is because of the innocence that you get from them. There's no agenda, there's no side to it. And your love of Sailor has been completely innocent. You couldn't help yourself. The same way I couldn't when I heard my first gramophone record when I was a little boy. And I don't know what it was now, because you can't define intellectually how you feel when you're small. So you only know that you have a feeling. We now talk, I talk too much, but we now talk a lot when we describe things. But I can remember hearing this record. It was on the Decca label. It was a 78 record. And I can remember the smell of the Bakelite, it going onto the wind-up gramophone, and my mother playing the Black and White Rag by Winifred Atwell. And it stirred something in me that had nothing to do with the toy cars I was playing with, nothing to do with the pet animals I was stroking, nothing to do with anything other than just this magical sound. And I remember seeing gramophone records in shop windows and marveling at them with great excitement, like they were these magical things that if you took them down off the wall,
Sure.
they play. Because you did, in the very old days, you just had gramophone records in windows. I mean, they didn't have anything on them. They just had the title of the record, but there was no sophistication in advertising then. So that was an absolute innocent love that I had of music. Nothing was going to stop me.
Yeah.
And that's what you kind of presented, in my opinion, with your love of Sailor. It doesn't involve you having to explain it to anybody. You don't explain when you love something, do you? It's a feeling, and that's it. And that's the fact that you've carried that natural affection with you, and I think that's why you're still friends with everybody. We all like to be liked, don't we?
Indeed, yes. I still have that very first letter you wrote to us from the fan club, or actually Jean Murray sent that to us, wink wink, the fan club secretary, and there was a handwritten letter from you attached to our membership thingy, because I had drawn a couple of Sailor logos in different styles, and Carsten had put that in an envelope and sent it to the fan club. And then we got this lovely handwritten letter from you back, and that's basically how everything started. So you said you'd like to meet us someday, and then Carsten took me to that first concert, and that letter is still in my purse at this point, and I've never taken it out.
That's so fabulous. And the reason for that letter would have been that there would have been fan mail, and there would have been stuff, and there would have been people remembering everything, and I was sort of, you know, taking it upon myself to be a fan club secretary. So I thought, well, I'll be a woman.
Yeah,
if any,
I'll find it. I'll just. I'm gonna find
I remember
it.
if I got written to by men and they flirted with me, I always wrote back to them sooner because they thought Jean Murray was a woman. But anyway, yeah, there won't have been that fantastic.
It's a copy. It's not the original, which is in a safe place. But
well, the thing is, it would have stood out probably that somebody had gone to all this trouble to do this thing. Was it a piece of cloth? No, what was it you'd done?
There were 3 drawings basically of the sailor logo in different styles, and like 11 or 12-year-old girls do, with kind of glitter and stuff like that. So
fabulous. No,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't remember it as that. No, but
also I think I had made a little like mixtape of my favorite songs and had like cut them into some kind of medley, and then you wrote in the letter that you played it to George and thought it was clever and you'd like to meet us sometime. And
yeah,
that's the reason we got to our first concert.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was it stood out, obviously, or I wouldn't have written a letter. I wouldn't have bothered that. I'd have just let Jean Murray send her customary thing.
I remember I phoned Carsten at the office because I came home from school and found the letter, and he was still at work. So I phoned him, and he said, "Oh my God, I have to see this." And then after work, he drove to our house and basically just kept reading it over and over for like half an hour, shaking his head in complete disbelief that one of you had reacted to anything we did personally. And
yeah,
it's such a clear, good memory of this.
Yeah.
And also I clearly remember buying Street Lamp at a record store when it came out, because that's just when my love for Sailor like really started, with the comeback album, and then really with Street Lamp, and how I had the CD in the pocket of my winter coat and took it home like a little treasure, and just such clear memories etched into my brain.
Just like I was with my favorite bands. You see, you're not any different to me. That thing about Carsten being surprised that any member of this band has spoken to him, that to discover overnight that whereas I'd just been an ordinary person like everybody else, and as soon as you become a pop star,
yeah,
you know, people, strangers, understandably, even people that were family and relatives behaved differently towards you. I mean, Ringo Starr said that in the Beatles, you know, when he said he you know, the Beatles became the biggest thing that's ever been as far as popularity is concerned, and he remembered that they used to play this northern town, and he went back to his auntie's, as he always did, to have a cup of tea, and he said it was like a dagger to the brain when his auntie or somebody spilled his tea into the saucer, and they went, "Oh, we can't have that." And it's like in his own auntie's home, they started treating him like he was royalty, and he wasn't little Richie anymore. He was just this sort of person. And so the distance he felt from being normal with other people, rather than feeling like privilege, it's not just strangers who think that you're something different and you don't communicate with people the same way. You know, even your own family could become strange. And that happened not really with me. We weren't really big enough, we're successful enough to be permanently in the newspapers. I think if people are permanently in the public eye newspapers, people see them as sort of objects of observation rather than friends and family, and they can get a bit strange. But yeah, I always, even now, I've always enjoyed meeting people so well I don't come across as Henry Marsh from Sailor, but I'm actually Henry, you know. And yes, that's what I do. I get up on the stage and I do that, you know, and somebody else does something else. And yeah, it's one of the things that goes with it, really. People expecting that you won't have anything to do with them because you're famous. Doesn't last long, don't worry.
Yeah, but that's such a very clear memory. These early days, especially, everything was just so exciting, and every time we met you, it was nerve-wracking, but in a good way. And it's like really, I can still tell you every single date, every city we've been to, every venue, set lists and stuff. Not because I sat down and learned them by heart or something, but because I just felt they were so important that they just stuck with me.
How fantastic!
You know.
How fantastic!
I remember you quizzed me at my 100th concert, and I had the dates written on the back of my T-shirt, and you were testing me to see if I remember them really.
You should come if you when next time you decide to come to England, come down to the West Country and stay with me and Dee Dee, and I will put you to the test, and you can help me try and recall my past, because I've always said I would never write a personal history. I think I would like a personal history that includes my time in Sailor, but has got as much to do with the fact that I came from a certain type of background that didn't normally go into rock and roll music, and the world that was in. But it would be nice not to just try and recall my own memories, but get somebody like yourself, who, not like yourself, there's only one Katrin, sorry, yourself. You should come over and stay sometime before we all get too old.
Okay.
It'd be very nice, and we could just have a look at everything.
Yeah, it's been way too long since we've seen each other in reality. It's like 10 and a half years. Yeah,
well, and I don't like flying too much, and I was very relieved when, you know, I mean, the last thing I did in America was music for Pericles, and I didn't like. I'm glad I flew over there because I won the award. so you know, I'm glad I could go over there, but good name drop for your listeners. I did well. Yeah, but I hate flying. I don't like it.
Yeah. Not too fond of it either, yeah.
Probably still pretty safe. No, I think everything with pandemics and the way the world is changing now, you know, I don't get the same sort of work I would get in America. Nothing to do with my age. It's more to do with my ethnicity, I'm afraid. You know, there's a new world now in the arts which says that, you know, people of other ethnicities have been deprived, therefore they should be given more opportunity. I'm trying to put this as unsensationally as I can, and it has taken its toll on people who maybe we have undeservedly been given more opportunity. But no, I'm not complaining. I have enjoyed it, but we should have a get together. And the history of Sailor, of course, you've heard it so many times before, and also you've obviously you'll edit all my burbling right down, so you're getting what you want, won't you? I can't think of anything really different. Yes, we did German TV, of course, didn't we, at the time of Gimme Shakespeare?
Yeah, a lot, yeah.
Yeah, we did all that, definitely did.
Yeah, got a couple of Give Me Shakespeare and All I Need Is a Girl videos and stuff like that. Yeah. And also there's this famous one of you doing your song Stay the Night on a children's TV show, so you had to change the lyrics to Stay a While.
Stay a while. But then Mick Jagger had to sing Let's Spend Some Time Together rather than Let's Spend the Night Together. So, you know, I mean, if Jagger has to do it, then one shouldn't come. But how pathetic is that, you know?
I know, yeah.
Stay the night. I wonder. I don't think so. I don't think many of the rap artists would have survived Basil Brush show.
Yeah, I mean, George once said to me 1 or 2 years ago, he said, well, he couldn't write any of his lyrics for Sailor these days. He would end up right in the middle of some kind of Me Too campaign or something like that.
Well, I mean, absolutely. But I mean, even a glass of champagne, you know, I've got the money, I've got the place, you've got the figure, you've got the face. I mean, that's about as chauvinist you can get. And then you've got yellow, red, black or white, and a little bit of moonlight. No, we've had it. I can see us hanging from the lampposts.
Cancelled.
You can see us hanging from Sailor street lamps.
Hanging from the street lamp. I was just going to say that too. From the Sailor town decoration in the background.
Yes, a whole new approach to Christmas decorations. It's assassinated artists from the mid-70s.
Different times, yeah. On the other hand, I keep thinking if we had social media a couple of years ago, what I could have done to promote your gigs better and stuff like that. But that's long gone too. Always trying to promote Ollie's shows a little bit here and there, but
he loves it when you come over, and he's getting. Whether we do something or not next year, I think will be purely dependent on. I think whatever the discussion is, it has to be intelligent regarding what would genuinely be done. But of course, a 50th anniversary for you is quite significant. But you have to know there's interest anywhere else, because I mean, Coldplay and Chris Martin, who I know quite well because he was a kid when I met him. He's going to be 50 next year. He's the same age as Tom, so he's got to be 49. And they're talking. I see them as like a young band. They've been going for 20 years, and their early Coldplay stuff is nearly nostalgia. It's nearly the same thing as us having been in the 70s and coming back in the 90s. So think, and you've got Oasis doing this ridiculous reunion tour worldwide, and the noise and the media attention it's made, purely because, as like you said, both Gallagher brothers are still alive, and they were enormous at the time, but they're even bigger now because the kind of hype that one can put on it.
Sure.
But whether a 50th anniversary of us, I personally think there is a fascinating story to tell that is all to do with the uniqueness of the thing that ended up with something that sounds like a good commercial song. But I think the story, if you want to try and stand out in a media where you've got Netflix, Prime Video, every conceivable form of channel of entertainment, the documentary, if you were to do like classic albums, the documentary of Sailor would be, a guy sitting with a saw making the instruments and having an idea that actually involved us putting down electric guitars and going to a completely different world. It's more like the sort of a strange type of sort of invention in the early 70s that some people try out and they take it out on the road like the first men trying to fly a plane. I think that's the story that I would think, if you'd say 50 years ago, something very, very unique happened.
Yeah.
And the end result of it was 50 years ago, but say 48 years, 2 years preceding that, something happened. And then I'd have a documentary, and then that would be the sort of documentary which you would be on, and people who genuinely have something to say about Sailor and really know about it, not people who have promoted us once for 1 year in CBS and never really liked us, like Muff Winwood, people who didn't like our music but had to promote us because they were in the record company. I think that's the story. So hopefully we can see if anybody wants to make that movie.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah.
All right, my darling, well, lovely to see you. Do give my regards or love to your parents.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much for taking the time for our little interview here.
Oh, we're on. This is you saying.
I'm just gonna stop. I'm just gonna stop recording, and we can.
Okay. Well, before you stop recording, goodbye, everybody, and I hope she's edited this down to something not too long.
You just wait for it. Just kidding. Thank you very much, Henry.
Darling, look after yourself.
You too.
See you very soon.
Excellent. This is one for Henry. Henry over here is going to sing this next song. This is he's another oldie. And what are you doing here?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. This one's called "Stay the Night." 1, 2, 3.
Stay